morning everyone, it's Carol here at Aakash channels, and I thought I would do a quick video today to share with you how I plan to store my altered guest checks now that the first 50 stack challenge is finished. And it's very much a work in progress, so please bear with me, but I couldn't actually show you the end result until the challenge was actually finished. And now that it is finished, I don't have time for the next couple of weeks to actually complete the initial preparations that I've done. But when we started off, our guest checks looked like this. This is a brand new stack of guest checks, and they were about a centimetre thick. But as we've gone along, we've altered and embellished these and added dimension to them. So I found that when I finished all 50 guest checks, it was about 7 inches thick. It was really chunky. And for the last few weeks, I've been trying to decide or determine how I was going to store my altered guest checks. A wee while back, when I did the 12 tags of 2015 along with Tim Holtz, when I finished my tags, I used coat hanger shaped paper clips and actually hung them up in a box I created with a piece of doweling inside. So they hung up inside the box like clothes in a wardrobe. Now, whilst that is a great way to store tags, and it would be a great way to store these altered guest checks, for me personally, it wasn't a good idea because I have 2 of those boxes full of tags and it takes up a huge amount of room here in my craft room. So I wanted something that was going to be smaller and more manageable. The other idea I thought of was actually putting the guest checks behind each other and put them in a little wooden box or a vignette box, something like that, and store them that way. But that doesn't really give them the protection that I want them to have. Having completed them all, I want to look after them. And also it's open to the dust and the air, and I didn't feel that, again, that was going to be really what I wanted for here in my craft room. So I decided to bind them into a journal, very much like I've rebound the assignments that I did for Marguerite Miller's Collage Weekly Planner project last year. If I bound them individually, then again the spine on that journal would have been 6 or 7 inches. It would have been very narrow, not particularly high, but it would have been incredibly wide and chunky, and that wasn't the look that I wanted. So what I decided to do was to bind my guest checks in a journal where I could have them side by side, so 2 abreast. So this is the solution I came up with. Now this is, as I said, very much a work in progress. And if I open them up, you can see I can get 2 guest checks side by side on each page. And that, whilst it still means I've got a chunky journal, let me close this up again and you can see, it's not too bad, it's manageable. And this looks more like a regular size journal. So the spine on this one, whilst it's bulging here, is probably only going to need to be about 2.5 inches. I think I could even probably get away with 2.25, but I will give myself 2.5 to give a little bit more room inside and not to crush them too much. Now this, as you probably saw, is an old medical encyclopedia that I've just cut down and decided to use. The pages inside are from this bookkeeping analysis pad, and I use this in my journals. The first page I've coffee stained, but this is what it looks like when it's brand new. And as you can see, the page is blank on the reverse. Now, I didn't want my pages to be blank. I did want my pages to be neutral because of the variations or the variety in designs and colours that I've got in my altered guest checks. So I felt that a neutral background would be appropriate. I could have used plain paper, but I didn't have any that was this size, and I needed something that, for me personally, because of the size of my guest checks, needed to be at least 36 centimeters across, or 14 inches across. So what I did, given that this was blank on the reverse and fairly thin paper, was I glued my sheets back to back, so the white sides together, which would give me a sheet of paper that looked like that. And then I trimmed it to size. Now, the size I've got for the size of my guest checks, and I do know that they all vary slightly, but the size I work to, in case you're interested, 18 centimeters across by 19 centimeters high, and they are double. As you can see, they're folded in half. So the full width of this is obviously 36 centimeters by 19 centimeters high. Now, if I bring out one of my guest checks, you can see that if I give myself a little, say 5mm margin down here, you can see that I've got a much bigger space up there. And the reason I've done that is because some of my guest checks have bows at the top. And I wanted some of the bow, not all of it, to be protected, but I didn't want masses of frou-frou and bow and ribbon oozing out of the top. Now, if that's a style that you like, then obviously you can reduce the height of your pages, but I didn't want to do that. I don't mind a little bit poking out the top, but I didn't want oodles. So as you can see, I glued my pages together and they're like this, and this is a reject because the gluing went wrong. It's good because I've got an example to show you. So I've left enough room by making them 18 centimeters wide. I've left enough room for me to be able to have my guest checks side by side on my page like that. It gives me room at the top to protect the bow. And what I've done, if I lift out the first signature here, what I've done is I've reinforced the fold on each one with a strip of just torn fabric, and I've glued that in place with Fabri-Tac, trimmed it at the top, and that is going to help reinforce my signatures because I'm actually going to be stitching each one along the inside crease there into a hidden spine in my journal there. As you've also seen, I've got a strip of vellum going along the bottom. Now, I've actually just folded over strips of vellum. It's not going to open up. I've folded over strips of vellum. Now, the reason I've done that is because whilst this, oh, there we go, is because whilst this is heavyweight vellum, I wanted to reinforce that top edge. I've cut strips that don't go the whole width of my page on the inside. I've done them so that there is a minuscule gap between where the fold line is, and that will make it easier for me folding my pages and my signatures to sit nicely inside my journal. What I plan to do with each of my pages is to stitch all the way round the outside of each page, and that will stitch my vellum pocket at the bottom, and it will stitch this flap down, but I will put a dab of glue along the edge here and the sides first before I actually stitch it. So that's what I was thinking about doing with that. Let me pop that one to one side. So as you can see, my little guest checks sit nicely side by side inside their pockets like that. I will want to know what the prompts are for each guest check. So what I thought of doing for that is to put a little label at the bottom underneath each guest check on the vellum pocket with the prompt on it. So for prompt 1, I'd have a little label here saying red, and for this one, the second guest check, saying paint. And I'm going to computer generate those simply because my writing isn't good enough, and to stamp them all would take forever. And to add another little bit of interest, what I thought I would do is just add a little tiny strip of this fabric underneath the label, just to add a little bit of an embellishment. I might even stitch around each one. I don't know, depends on how the mood will take me. So let me show you. If I pop this one back in here, I have got 7 signatures here. If I lift this up to one side, you can see I've created 7 signatures. And given that we have 50 guest checks and they're sitting side by side, that meant that there were a couple of blank pages, and that is what I wanted for this particular journal. So on this first front page, I'm going to have a piece of paper saying that this is the 50 stack challenge hosted by Amy and the date. On the inside first page, or the second page if you will, I'm going to have a little note tucked in the pocket, vellum pocket here, saying what the challenge is all about. And then from there on in, I've got my guest checks sitting 2 to a page. So if I flip this one over, you can see like that, and then like that, and it so on throughout my journal. Now at the end, I will have another blank page. So if I flip this over, at the end, this page will be blank. Now I could put something on there. I could use the same inside cover papers here on here to make it blend through. I wanted a spare page in case I had a spare guest check, because for some of the prompts, I actually did 2 guest checks, and let me show you. So for example, the one we did for week 44, I actually did a couple of spares, and this is one of the spares. And I did that with an earlier prompt. I created a spare card. And I just wanted somewhere to store those spare ones. That's why I wanted to have a spare pocket at the end, or a spare page at the end. So there we go, everybody. As I've said, this is very much a work in progress, and I will finish it off. So I hope you will pop by to have a look at the part 2 video, which will show this journal all finished, done and dusted. I hope this has been useful if you have been pondering how you're going to save or store your altered guest checks now that the first 50 stack challenge is finished. So thank you so much as always for watching, everybody. Take care, and until the next video, bye bye now.